Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are excited that so many of you could join us today for this live masterclass with Thomas Hübl on the emerging field of collective trauma work, how to integrate the principles of collective trauma healing into your life and practice. My name is Richard Tabinger, and I will be co-hosting this event today and was part of the team that recently organized the Collective Trauma Summit. Let me make a few quick announcements before we get going. First, we invite you to submit questions for Thomas at any time by clicking on the Q&A button found at the bottom of your Zoom window or by tapping the screen on your mobile device. And if you have any technical difficulty, our support team is here to address any concerns you have, and you can contact support by emailing onlinecoursesupport@thomashubl.com. Now, secondly, over the last year, as a result of many people asking for more advanced trainings in collective trauma, and because of the massive interest in our most recent summit, we had over 108,000 participants. For the first time, Thomas is going to be opening a 4-month immersion program called Principles of Collective Trauma Healing. Enrollment just opened, I think, yesterday. And if you think you may be interested, we're going to be sending out more information in the following days. And if you're watching this talk on the replay, you can click the link below to find out more. That program starts mid-November. It includes live sessions, breakout groups, and it's really a unique program. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you inside there. Now let me introduce my co-host, Anna, who will be in conversation with Thomas Hübl today. Anna Molitor is a somatic healing practitioner, group facilitator, and a lover of poetry and movement arts that open a path toward what is most essential. She has a deep passion for the mystery and precision of individual and collective trauma healing and restoration. Many of you may know her. She's a senior student of Thomas Hübl, and as well as the event manager for Thomas's Celebrate Life Festival in the United States. She was also delighted to serve as the poetry and music curator for the 2020 Collective Trauma Summit. Welcome, Anna. Hi. There you are.
Hi. Thanks, Richard.
And she is going to be asking Thomas a lot of the questions today and kind of facilitating the conversation. Now, let me do a quick introduction to Thomas. He's a spiritual teacher, a speaker, author, and the founder of the Academy of Inner Science. He's worked with more than 100,000 people worldwide through workshops, multi-year trainings, and online courses. Just a few weeks ago, Thomas hosted the Collective Trauma Summit 2020, The Power of Collective Healing, which, as I mentioned before, drew over 108,000 participants, the largest event of its kind. This topic has never been more relevant in our world. Just a quick note that next month, Thomas has a forthcoming book called Healing Collective Trauma, and that's going to be released in mid-November. Welcome, Thomas.
Hello. Thank you, Richard. Hello.
And let me go ahead and pass the microphone virtually over to Anna, who will be asking Thomas questions on this webinar on the emerging field of collective trauma work. And just a quick reminder, again, you can insert your questions in the Q&A box. And at the end of this this training call, we're going to be answering your questions toward the end. So thank you. Take it away, Anna.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm really happy to be here with both of you. This is such an important work for me as well. And I've had an incredible experience in the years that I've been in this community. So I'm excited to be here for this conversation with you all. And also just feeling all of you out there listening with us right now, and those of you who will watch this later, that you're a part of this field already. And so it's great to be with all of you, and wonderful that so many of us are drawn to be doing this work together in this time. So Thomas, could you start maybe by providing some context for this emerging field of work with collective trauma? Why are we in this moment looking at developing methods to address and work with collective trauma and collective healing in our world? Like, why is this so essential for humanity right now, for our collective future together?
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I think you mentioned it. It's for our future together. And I think that's an important part that I think the amazing findings and developments that many of the pioneers of trauma work and psychotherapy, going back to Freud and before to all kinds of healing modalities that we had throughout thousands of years, basically. You know, we try to heal ourselves from the wounds that we inflicted often onto each other as humanity. And we try to find and improve ways how to heal ourselves. So all of that knowledge and all of that healing power is within the human system. It's within the cells of our bodies, our emotions, our minds. So first of all, it's good to say that we are not the first ones that are exploring healing, and they're all around the world. There have been different traditions and modalities developed, and I think we are also drawing on this knowledge and on those skills. The other thing is that I believe we are literally at the doorstep, or we are at the threshold to walk into a new era. And that era is already, the bells are ringing. It's kind of technology and the global development and global challenges. Everything kind of points towards, or a signpost towards, kind of a different kind of global collective collaboration. We see it through COVID, we see it through climate change, we see it through kind of the enormous inequality around the world. So there are things that can't continue the way they are if we just look at our biodiversity. So there are some things that are deeply pushing and pressing, and there are red arrows pointing towards a new level of collective collaboration. And I think technology has a wonderful part to play in it, and has also like an amplification of the shadow world that we are dealing with as a contribution. But there is a kind of a global village, and suddenly we can't say anymore, let's put it all out there, because there is no out there when we are in one village, and the village is a sphere. So there is no out there anymore. And that's true for our waste. That's true for the way we kind of exploit our natural environment. And that's also true for our past. And collective trauma means that trauma, of course, in my individual experience, my attachment trauma happened to me. And maybe the shock trauma that I experienced in my life or through some events in my life, they are personal and connected to my biography. But the fact that maybe many of our parents couldn't provide all the qualities of an attachment process that would support my potential fully and your potential fully means that there was trauma there too. And then when we look back into our ancestral tree, our roots, you know, some of our ancestors were less traumatized and some of them were more traumatized. And when you look back, we see that actually trauma is a systemic effect. It didn't start with us, and the reverberations of transgenerational trauma transmission, our kind of waves going through the generations, and life tries to heal itself through us. And then we call it personal issues. We call it personal problems, disorders, mental disorders, physical disorders, social disorders. But in fact, it's life trying to detox the unintegrated past. And I often say trauma is taking a loan from our future. We are taking a loan. We are in a way trying to deal with an overwhelming effect now, but we have to pay back our debts. If not, a lot of my life will be based on, in a way, exploiting nature in my body. And I'm not doing this just because I'm not skilled enough. I'm doing this because often I don't feel anymore the normalization of stress, the trauma left or the trauma traces left in my body. So I'm actually functioning chronically on a higher stress level. My regulation functions don't work properly, but I call this me because that's how I know myself for decades. And so we want to honor that the trauma response in us and in many of our ancestors was a fantastic way that life developed to survive better and to survive crazy situations. I mean, if you just look back in history, many of our ancestors survived crazy moments. And so the fact that we are all here today means there is some resilience and there is some power in that fragmentation, dissociation, hyperactivation. There is an intelligence at work. And like we all know, if we take loans, we have to pay them back. Otherwise, our lives are not sustainable. And our lives are not sustainable at the moment, often within our bodies, within our psyches, and they are not sustainable on a much bigger systemic level when we look at our natural environment. And that's a wake-up call, I believe. And the wake-up call concerns all of us. It's not just one of us or a few of us doing this. No, we need all of us. And that's what I call the resurrection of the collective witness. We are all part of a humanity that takes responsibility because we integrate trauma enough that we are able to respond. Because otherwise we will react. And if we react, we reenact the past. Reactivity is action without feeling. And all I have is what I tried in the past and what we tried as humanity in the past. Responsibility means I can respond. I have a choice. In that moment, I have a choice. And I think we want to enable more and more of us to have, in more and more moments, a choice. That I can choose. Because there's freedom, there's presence, there's embodiment. There's the willingness to experience this moment deeply. There is intimacy. And I believe that intimacy with life gives me in more and more moments the felt experience, not just the intellectual knowing, the felt experience that I'm interconnected, that we are interdependent, that we are all part of a living system. And so that's why I believe that many aspects nowadays are pushing us into kind of a deeper understanding how the individual and the collective are interdependent, how whatever happens to anybody in the world is connected to me, is connected to my body, is connected to my interior, and vice versa. And I believe that's why we learn more and more how to harvest the power of collective presencing, the power of collective healing, the power of that I'm not just an outside listener. I'm always an integral part of the presence of the moment. And since we all have been born, I often say, when you see the photo of the planet, the overview effect you see from outer space, and it was a famous moment where the subject of our consciousness became an object. Suddenly we could see the planet from outside for the first time. We could see the living system that we are part of from a bigger perspective. In the consciousness evolution, we call this subject-object transcendence. Suddenly I have space to witness. But even the astronaut that took the photo was part of the collective trauma field. So collective trauma was bigger than the photo. And that's something I believe for all of us to contemplate is that there is a systemic effect that all of us have been born into, some of us in easier forms, some of us in more severe forms. And we are part of a systemic effect that became normalized. Trauma became a normal part of our society. Because, of course, we see trauma when it happens, when there is a war, or when there is an atrocity or a crime or a car accident, or when children get heavily neglected. We notice that, but that there is a much bigger systemic aspect. We have to more and more together, I believe, become aware of the many thousands of ways how trauma has kind of fine fibers in many aspects of our lives. And once we notice them as a trauma field, because trauma fields by their nature are hidden and frozen. So the more ice we carry inside, I believe the more ice will melt outside. And the more ice we melt inside, the more we conserve outside. So that we find out why, for example, we respond slowly to climate change, why we see the political polarization that we see at the moment, why we see many side effects in our culture that actually point towards the very thing that we are looking for. And I think the last thing is that I believe it's an exciting process, because since all of us have been born into the field that is thousands of years old of collective trauma reoccurring and being reenacted and so on, it's amazing that we can learn to see what we cannot see. Because if it conditioned us partly through our parents, our teachers, the society around us, through our epigenetics, through many aspects, it's part of, I carry it inside, and often I don't even know that I carry it inside. And that's why I believe we are embarking onto, maybe for the first time in human history, given the technology development, we have also the chance to create enough coherence and enough interconnectedness also digitally. Like now, there's so many people online right now. We are all here because of the very technology that we are using right now. And I believe that's an enormous opportunity. And I think it shows what mystics were talking about for thousands of years as the internal capacities of our consciousness that are represented more and more in our external world. And so I think that's also, it's not only dark. I think we have many opportunities to explore, to walk into, and to create the communities of healing that we need, so that we can become the remedy for, like, to heal the legacy and not pass it on, or pass it on in a much more reduced form to the next generation, so that there's a brighter future.
Thank you so much, Thomas. There's so many beautiful things that you spoke to, and it's so lovely. I appreciated you speaking to the fact that as humans, we've been looking at this for a long time in different ways, but right now is this moment of collective collaboration, that we have a global village, and actually there's a new way that we're all the pieces of wisdom and the sparks from around the world and all the different traditions and ways of exploring this can come together. And I also am just noticing this kind of relief I feel each time collective trauma is spoken to, that we get to start naming something that I think a lot of us sense we're living in, but we don't have maybe we haven't had the language for it, or coming into this larger conversation. And I was just noticing the gratitude that I feel, even as there's so much else that we feel, coming up when we feel into the traumas, there's also this very beautiful ground when we come into the conversation together. And I'm so grateful to you for that way you have of naming this, so that we come in this creative collaboration and with the threads of healing too. And speaking of that, we were just coming out of this incredible collective trauma summit. So many beautiful ideas and so many different participants came together in that. And I'm wondering if you might be able to just share a little bit from the conversations you had and from what you witnessed, some insights or beautiful moments from that summit.
I think, first of all, I believe the amazing resonance that the summit had, and for many people, like a deep well of, an exploration that is multi or transdisciplinary, which means we invited and we curated very carefully like a collection of speakers that could speak to the topic of collective trauma from so many various paths and competencies and skill sets, and also professional experience. Because I believe, we are walking into a jungle that we haven't been in this way. And I believe we need the competencies, all those competencies, to illuminate the part of the jungle that we can't see. And so one deep experience was the beauty of so many different paths, including arts and poetry and all the beauty that brought in. And so I think that's one of the main learnings is that we found many people that are very open, and also in many of the conversations I had the feeling we are also giving birth, at least the ones that I was part of. I can only speak to that we gave birth to something new together. So there's a mutual creativity, and there's evolution unfolding online. Every time we give birth in the conversation to something new, that only happens because we come together. So the coming together is a fertile ground for co-thinking, co-sensing, co-innovation. And so for me, that was a very beautiful part of many of the conversations that I had with some of the speakers. And the other part was simply the whole energy. So many people participated and commented, and also within our team, there was an amazing energy to, as you know, and you, Richard, that we created something together, but the quality amongst us was amazing. And I think that's an amazing sign, like that we're all in for like a common mission or a common exploration that is dear to all of us in our hearts. And that's why it creates a field of intimacy in the exploration. So I felt that was very important. And ever since, I'm running groups almost for 2 decades, and ever since I was traveling around the world, I was always looking to find partners and people that I thought deeply resonate with the work I do, and to create a network. And I've done this through all the Celebrate Life festivals and all the big events that we did so far. And I deeply believe in this collective networking, that we are actually working as a team to illuminate through different capacities what we call collective trauma. And because it's syndemic, as Christina Bettel said, it's everybody in the system is affected by it somehow. I believe it needs all those competencies, and it needs as many of us as feel resonance to jump into the exploration, so that we more and more can turn the collective trauma field into an object of our consciousness, which means that we are able to witness it, that we can bring presence to it. And in the moment that happens more and more, it will start like a much stronger self-healing activation in the whole human system. Because in the moment we are not anymore unconscious to it, it will create a much stronger movement. And I think we are walking into this time, and I think that's very beautiful. And of course, all the summits that are going to follow will open more and more perspectives, and we will for sure become also, we will go deeper and deeper into certain collective trauma fields around the world, and open up more perspectives, so that that we simply open more and more eyes to see. And I think that's what's needed. When we are walking into the collective unconscious, we need many eyes to see, because every one of us brings light into that, what mythologically is called the underworld. But I think we are walking into that together as humanity. And it's very needed, as we said, given the current situation. So that's a little bit about the summit. And I think all the responses that we got, I mean, they were amazing responses from so many participants. So it was really very, very powerful experience. And for me, it's not, a summit is not only like an online conference that brings knowledge. It's actually part of the collective trauma work. Because I don't believe in separate knowledge. I think knowledge as embodied knowledge is wisdom. And then the word, what we say and what we transmit, is the same thing. And whenever that happens, healing happens. So that's why I believe the Collective Trauma Summit is part of, I believe, that collective healing power that's unfolding.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think a lot of us felt that. And it makes me think of how you've said that when we're in our calling, we can be in the deepest trauma. We can be in the most tangled places, and there's a sense of joy, or there's a sense of aliveness, because it's our calling. And I think we experienced that with so many of the participants and the artists and the musicians, and that we were all in the team that produced it, that we were in our calling, and there was this nourishment of the coherence coming in and the healing happening online, and us feeling that team starting to assemble. And so it was quite beautiful to have a sense of that starting. And just turning that to a question about, so many of us are feeling the political polarization in the world, and also the polarization that's coming up within the pandemic with COVID. There's a lot going on with polarization right now. And could you say something about this, about the underlying nature of polarization in our world as a kind of collective trauma?
Yeah, so when in the kind of first part of our conversation, I mentioned that that one of the fundamental trauma symptoms is separation. That's why one of the healing elements is to create healing communities. I think also Christina Bettel spoke a lot to this, like what's already happening, for example, in the United States, in creating trauma-informed healing communities. And I think that's what we need. I think that's like to come together, or as William Ury says, we are the third side. We need to come together to take care of the issues within our culture. And so separation is a fundamental symptom. Dan Siegel, for example, spoke to this beautifully, like of the internal trauma fracture. And when we look at our nervous system, when we split the part of that is so overwhelmed in order to survive better, or to be in a situation in a better way, that's a short-term solution that helps us in overwhelming moments. But if we don't heal that fragmentation inside, it stays, and it's often, as I said, we see a crazy scene on the TV screen, a movie, and then we mute it, and the scene is still playing, and then we take the screen and we throw it into the water of the ocean, and there it slowly sinks into the darkness, and the scene's still going on. So in that fragmented part, the whole stress and intensity is going on, but we don't feel it anymore. That's why trauma by its nature comes with that hidden aspect, and once I carry that inside, there's a certain aspect of my outside world that I cannot perceive, and I don't know that I'm not perceiving it. Because every one of us would say, no, but I see the world. Yeah, but only to a certain degree, every one of us. And if I'm not humble enough to know that, I can be very certain and very sure that my version of the world is the right one. And if that's my stance, then I am already enacting my ignorance onto my environment. Because I believe the world that I see is the right one. Not, that's the world that I can perceive. And through relation, I find out what's the world that you are perceiving, and negotiation in a way and relating are ways to negotiate the mutual world. But if we are too certain, we lose the capacity to negotiate and relate. And then we are living in separate bubbles and opinions and interpretations about the world. And that's what we see. But if millions of people experience that, then we often project outwards onto our leadership, because the leadership will show that. The political system that we created is a reflection of the society. And even saying, oh, that's not me, is part of the issue, is part of the fragmentation. So internal fragmentations create collective fragmentations, canyons within our societies, opinions, values. And if we lose the power to negotiate them, if we lose the power to listen to each other, if we lose the power to put ourselves into each other's shoes, as William Ury put so beautifully, then we are enrolled in the unconscious fragmentation of our society, and we might think, I'm right. But the other person on the other side of the canyon also thinks he or she is right. So that's why I believe we have to start with ourselves. That's why also collective trauma work is so complex, because it starts that if I don't take care of my individual traumatization and if my individual stuff and trigger points and unconsciousness, no way that I can do collective trauma work, because I will always mix the collective with my personal experience, because I can't see and feel there, because I'm absent. So there is the work that many people, and I'm sure most of the people that are listening in right now, are in one way or the other already doing that kind of inner work that we need in order to bring presence and to bring awareness and to bring relatedness into the places where we felt hurt and where we felt cut off, or where we felt we were not nourished enough, or where we felt not as part of the whole. And so when we do that, then we can more and more engage, because we can feel it. That's the important part. When cognition and sensing becomes one. Otherwise, I can think a lot about the world, but if I cannot feel it, my mind becomes like a helicopter mind, floating on top of nature. In my body, and literally, if we do this collectively, then our minds are floating, and that's dangerous, because that mind can make decisions or take decisions that might hurt nature. And we see this over and over again. So the cognition, the rational age, together in an inner coherence with our heart and with our capacity to sense, then we use the highest potential of this biocomputer to participate in life. And then I feel I'm an integral part of life. I'm never outside. I'm never separate. Even if I feel separate, I'm not separate, because I'm always in life. I'm always part of life. And so the polarization is an effect of that kind of internal fragmentation, and the sum, like we are all shareholders of that collective fragmentation. And if we take back our shares and we turn them into relational competencies, negotiation competencies, into listening to one another and being able to represent each other in each other, I think then it doesn't mean that we agree, but it means that we are part of each other's worlds. And then we are part of one world. Otherwise, we live in seemingly separate worlds. So I think I could speak much more to that, but I think it's too long for today here. I think that's only a beginning of how trauma and collective trauma are part of that polarization. And by the way, that polarization is not just our issue in this time on the planet. I think it's something that humanity was struggling with in various forms over and over again. So it's up to us to see if we find some innovation to bring into this topic.
Yes, beautiful. I think we're here for that. And there's so much more, of course, that we could say about this. And I'm really glad you spoke to this piece of the individual work that we need. I think a lot of us are feeling the amount of, ground and work in ourselves that we're needing to show up, to feel, to not be numb. And I've had so many experiences of moving through layers and then feeling like, oh, there's a deeper piece I can now feel in the collective because something is settled in my own personal work. And I actually now can be much more here for the fragmentation in the collective that lives in me too. So that's beautiful. And thank you for naming that so clearly. And and you've spoken of this, the fields of dormant trauma in the collective, in our collective field. Just wondering if you can just share a little bit more about how we consciously can start to work with these dormant fields of trauma as a society, so we can start to heal what is held there.
So when we, first of all, I think the sentence describes it well, that integrated history is presence, unintegrated history is the past, and once we carry a lot of past, we project that past forward and we call it future. That's not the real future that, for example, Otto Scharmer is talking about in the sensing of the theory U. In the bottom of the U, we are touching the emergence of life. That's the future. That's, in a way, higher consciousness or evolution speaking through us and creating and innovating new opportunities, creativities, and new futures are opening up. And we see this in our world in many places where the innovation and the capacity is working, speaking, alive. But then the trauma field holds not only the past, but it holds a lot of our potential. That's why I often say trauma healing is a win-win-win. Everybody is winning. I get more energy, the collective gets more energy, the whole life gets more energy. It's a responsiveness and a response ability, an ability to respond to our ancestors, an ability to respond to our future and to the world around us. That's very powerful because a lot of energy is frozen in that past. And if we don't look at it, it becomes our destiny, which means we don't have a choice. We are reenacting unconsciously certain elements again and again and again, personally, collectively. If we look at it, we de-ice the past, we harvest our own potential. Like the more we heal together, the more everybody in life will find his or her place. Because the fact that life is sacred means that everybody alive has a place. And that's very powerful, that everybody has a right to be in life. It's sacred. And that's why everybody has a place by everyone's existence. And we want everybody to flourish, because if everybody flourishes, everybody brings more potential and energy into the world. But if a lot of energy is frozen, we are depleting not only our own bodies and our own selves, we're also depleting nature around us, because my body is the closest part of nature to my life. If I live a sustainable life, so I can live sustainable values around me. Sustainability is not just about outside. It's always inside and outside. So every one of us is being called to look at, how do I live my life? And where is my life sustainable and where it's not sustainable? In my body, in my emotions, in my mind, in a intimate relationship, in my family, in my work relations, everywhere. That's bringing awareness and consciousness into every part of my life. And that's not always an easy process, as we know. And so there is that part. And when we release some of the frozen layers, we also generate more energy for a brighter future. And I believe how we can do this, like we have, for example, as you know, we developed over the years multiple pillars within the collective trauma work. So of course, one pillar is that we do our personal integration work, because most of the people carry some sort of trauma in one way or the other within their experience. I think Christina Bettel spoke to the ACEs studies and to the statistics at the summit about how many people just in the United States experienced adverse childhood experiences. And so we are doing our personal work, but then within our personal work, there we can add a part that we call the integration of our collective trauma conditioning. How did it affect me to grow up in Austria when my grandparents were still experienced fully the Second World War? My grandfather was a soldier in the Austrian army, even if not for so many years, but that the whole after effect of my grandparents expressing, and then my parents growing up in this time, and then me being born into this field, how does it affect me? How does it condition me? What's the imprint that it left in me? And what is it for you growing up in the US, growing up in a culture that is deeply divided? The racism is very strong, and the split of 400 years of deep atrocities. How did it affect you when you were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? How is it stored in the archive of your consciousness? How is it stored in somebody that when their grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and we grow up in that field? So all around the world, more or less, there are strong wounds, and we grew up in a scar tissue. And as I said, not everybody is affected in the same way, but we are all part of that system. And so the integration, looking at that, because the more I become aware of my conditioning, the more I will see the collective trauma dynamics in my culture. The more unconscious I am to my own conditioning, it becomes a filter like sunglasses. I won't see certain information. It doesn't arise in my awareness. And so that's one thing. And then we work on the ancestral trauma transmission, how it got really transmitted to me, and how maybe patterns in my ancestors are alive in me today. And so that's the second pillar. The third pillar is we did a lot of work which we call CTIPs, collective trauma integration processes, that we took something like the Holocaust, the East-West separation in Europe, racism in the US, or dictatorships, or any kind of more massive wound. And we work with large groups of people to go through a whole process, how we surface part of that collective past together in an appropriate and safe environment, and then to integrate some of it in order to liberate that energy through us, and how that affects us personally, because every one of us has a share if we grow up in such an environment. So that, and then I think there's another interesting exploration that's also, if done in a community, very powerful, is the let's say language, social architecture, othering. There are many symptoms in our society. When we start to pay attention, we see more and more how, in a way, the collective trauma symptoms are surfacing every day around us. And the more people pay attention, and the more we become real witnesses of that, it's infused with awareness. So we are sending more consciousness into that unconscious process. And just the structures in our society that are frozen, when more and more of us become aware of those, we bring, in a way, warmth to those places. And so there are many more practices, but these are just four different pillars that I think are very powerful and transformational. They are being, I think we practice them in communities, but they have a deep effect onto our individual life. And so these are just a few elements, how we surface those fields together, because it's collective. It needs collectives to collaborate on its release.
Beautiful, Thomas. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going back to what the more we heal together, the more everybody will find their place in life also, which is really beautiful sentence. And it feels like you've been speaking a lot also to why it's important for each of us to look at how collective trauma lives in us, and also just thinking about why is it important to understand collective trauma for practitioners working with individuals also is a question. And I wanted to kind of bring that into a further question here, which is, I know you have this upcoming course, The Principles of Collective Trauma Healing. Just wondering who you think this is for, like who can really benefit from taking that course, and just to tell us a little bit more about why you created that.
Yeah, I think the course is part of a wider course framework, because I want to open up a deeper and deeper training for like how we work on collective trauma in general, and then to kind of transmit, as I did also in my book, like all the experience of the last 18 or so years, and all the modalities that we developed on the way. And this course specifically is like, we are looking at what are the principles of, it's also called the Principles of Collective Trauma Healing. It's a bit of different than our former online classes, because like before we had like 6-month courses. This one is a bit shorter, but it's more compact because we added some more intense weekends where we explore two aspects deeper. On the one hand, the conditioning that we look through, because once I become aware of the filter system that I kind of internalized as I grow up, like how collective trauma left an imprint in myself, my whole perception is changing, and I'll see more and more of the reality of collective trauma, especially in my culture where I live. And so that's what we're gonna explore together in a deeper process, and also the ancestral trauma transmission, how trauma and patterns of trauma, and also it's not only trauma, it's also kind of predispositions that are being transmitted. And I think these need deeper explorations. That's why we put them into kind of weekend intensives. And then we also gonna do some CTIP work, which means the collective trauma integration process for a topic together in with a whole group and with a whole team that is part of our course this time. And we're gonna explore in application sessions and show, okay, that's how it works when we go deeper as a community to look at a specific collective trauma topic. And I will also teach more about what also my book is, like one focus of my book is the CTIP. And I want to also teach more about the dynamics that I've seen and learned over time, how these collective trauma processes create kind of a similar process design, and what are the aspects of that process design, and who it's for. I think it's for everybody who is deeply resonant and interested in this work. And I think it's going to be also very interesting for anybody who is a practitioner and who works with clients in different ways to take that, to in a way take that part of our human existence more into account, because it's not necessarily a part of every other therapy training or whatever coaching training. So I think it's for a wider community, but especially if you feel like a deep resonance with the topic. So it says that I feel, as we also saw it with the summit, that there is a lot of interest. So I believe that that's the inner bell that's ringing. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm really excited about it myself. And I just want to add that one of the things that I think is so powerful is to do this work in community. For me, it's been an immeasurable gift, like to have a community of people called to do this work. And especially in this time, I feel like many of us feel it's very, very strong. And some of us feel pretty lonely in that. I see that out there. And I'm just really looking forward to how much energy is going to come together when all of us with this calling come into a relationship with these teachings together. So I really look forward to that with all of you who want to join. And just thank you so much, Thomas. It's just been really beautiful to have this conversation with you. Thank you for what you're offering all of us. And I'm going to hand this back over to Richard. It's been really a joy to be with both of you today. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Anna and Thomas. Now I feel the weight of the questions here because we have about 165 questions and, just a few minutes to answer them. So I've picked a few questions. It's wonderful to see the interest. Just quickly, Thomas's upcoming course is going to start on November 15th. And we'll send more details out via email, or if you're watching this, you can refresh the page to find out more. You can also go to the URL, which is collectivetraumaprinciples.com, and there's all the details there. So I won't talk much more about that. We'll just get into some questions here. So I have a question from Lisa here, and she just asked, how do we, as the healers on the front lines, the first wave of the aware, find support and not get traumatized in the process of bringing this healing to others and educating ourselves?
Yeah, that's an important question. So I see all of us that feel called to do deep healing work. It doesn't matter if one is a doctor or a therapist or any kind of other healing modalities. It matters the profession, but it's kind of on a deeper level. It's like the self-healing mechanism of the world. It's like the incarnation of the healing mechanism of life. And so I think we need communities. Sometimes one source of depletion or even accumulation of trauma energy in ourselves is because we don't have the right support system. And if people are exposed to trauma often, especially on the front lines of this work, we need a good support system. So that's one thing. I think we need definitely to understand the energetic principles of trauma that might influence our own dormant trauma layers. And then that's what we are suffering from when it gets activated or resonant oftentimes. So I think we need to do our own work continuously, which many of us are doing anyway, then have a right community, have resourcing mechanisms that every one of us knows how to resource ourselves, and very importantly, to refine constantly what's my motivation to do what I'm doing. What's my motivation to do what I'm doing? The motivation is the inner alignment. And there are different forms of motivation. Maybe there's my purpose, but maybe also my childhood conditioning or other conditionings are part of my expression. And the more I can clear and crystallize the core motivation, the less I will engage in processes that I'm not fully aware of. And I think that's very important too, because if I deplete myself by being on the front lines, I actually burn my substance, and I'm not responsible with life that is sacred in me. It's not necessary. It's considered like a great service, but if I burn my body, it's not a great service. And I think that we all need to know like the basic principles of our energetic rejuvenation or regeneration. And I think if we do this as a community, we support each other, and it literally becomes a self-healing system or the immune system of our culture. And the stronger and more energized the immune system is, I think the more powerful is the healing effect that we're going to express together.
That's great. And you did touch upon this during some of this last hour, but I think some people, there's a bunch of questions about what are the links between, collective and personal healing. So Y says, I'm wondering about the connection between personal trauma and personal healing journey and collective trauma and its healing. Is it up to me to heal all, aka contribute to the collective healing, or is it my contribution just to my personal journey? Could you expand on how these are connected?
It's both. It's both. It's like the stacked Russian puppets. It's like that my personal experience is always part of a bigger context. I don't exist alone, which means my trauma doesn't exist alone either. So it means that the fact that there is trauma in my life, usually that trauma is embedded in a much wider web of trauma that same as my body is hundreds of thousands of years old and older. Like the fact that cells stick together and create tissues and organs and intelligent nervous systems and so on, and emotional systems and societies is not my invention. I got most of it through my DNA and my environment and so many generations figuring out how to live so that we can have this conversation today. And the same is with the trauma structures in us. So I have to start, like, I believe one rule in the healing work is that in doubt, start with the closest circle of intimacy, which is me and myself. And the same is when I'm unclear in life. When I'm unclear in life, come back to your self-contact. Always come back to that which is closest to us. Because otherwise, we are very easily in the projection and entanglement with the world. And so I start with my own healing process. And then, but inevitably, because my own healing process will continue, but oftentimes there will be a stagnation at a certain point, because like in the spiritual traditions, the karma of my life is connected to a much wider net of living. So eventually I will hit the conditions that led up to my life, and I will have to, through my parents and my grandparents and so on, and through the structures in my society. So when I start with my personal healing journey and I do it well and skillfully, inevitably, I will need to expand the map of information that I include. And it's not that we have to heal the collective. Nobody alone can heal the collective. It's a collective endeavor, but we can do our work skillfully, so everybody will do the work he or she has to do. It's like in an orchestra. It's in the Philharmonic Orchestra. I don't want to all the time control how you play your violin while I'm playing the piano. I will play the piano as best as I can, and I trust that you will play your violin as good as you can. And together with all the other musicians, we are creating wonderful music. And that's, I believe, what collective healing is about. We are not playing alone at home. We are also not playing a solo. We are playing in an orchestra, which means we all need to listen to each other, and we all need to listen to the conductor, which is the higher organizing principle. And we need to play our piece well. And I think these are the capacities of collective healing. Everybody does their own healing work, and then we expand, and it's opening up. I believe it's part of opening up our personal experience into the collective. That is also the next step of humanity's awakening or evolution. So what we see today is not going to stay what we see in 50 years from now. And loosening up the trauma field will bring a lot of illumination, transcendence, transparency, openness, collective collaboration, speeding up the speed of data, but also within our nervous systems, not just in the computer CPUs. And it's like there is a change of consciousness that comes. So we don't know the world, how it's going to look like, when the density of the past will be more and more opened up, and the data of life, like the relational network and the interdependence, will be elevated to another level of symphony. We are all part of finding out what that's going to be like.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Thomas. And I liked what you said earlier in the call today too about us being shareholders and each taking our piece of the share. And then just the whole concept here has been the emerging field. So there's the field of the work that's being done, but also the non-local fields that we're turning into. Okay, I'm gonna ask. I've got again, we have over 180 questions, so we're kind of at time here. I'm gonna slip one more question and try to get 3 questions in one here because a bunch of people have asked this. So I think a lot of people are showing interest and they want to know what they can do. And I'm just going to ask a couple questions here. This one's from Wyra. I'm doing energy work on a one-to-one basis, and I feel a call inside me to go bigger, whatever that means. What can I do? And here's another one from a young person that's saying, what would you recommend as a path of learning to a young person who wants to help the collective trauma fields? So I think people are wanting to get involved. They're really wanting to show up to do something about collective trauma, and they're asking kind of what's the next steps? How do they approach it?
Yeah, I think there are 2 levels. There's there's one level that I can do for myself if I'm interested in it, and then there is another level, what can I do professionally if I'm interested in making this a path for my life and my professional life. On the first level, I think it's to just take some of the points that we opened up today, and we opened up a few points just for the contemplation. And if we look at collective trauma in myself, in ourselves, in the people around us, in the society dynamics, and even if I don't even fully understand it yet, if I just pay attention, like always, like if somebody tells you something and you never, you thought, oh wow, right, I could look at this, and then in the moment I start looking at it, I'll see it also more and more. And then it becomes like an unfolding process. So that's one thing. And the other thing is we are right now in the making, I mean, the course is the first step, but we are right now in the making of a deeper program. We call it the School of Collective Trauma Integration within our Academy of Inner Science. And for everybody who is deeply interested in going into this for a longer time and making this a deep study process, because I think it's very important that collective trauma is very complex and the forces of the collective unconscious are very strong. And I think we need many skills in order to do this kind of work. So it's a deeper study process. It needs a deeper commitment. And so for everybody who wants that, if you stay tuned and if you look at our kind of publications, like this course is part of it, but there will be more things that relate to this school, like this course does, and I think but it needs a deeper commitment, because like we can also start mixing a lot of internal experiences and internal perceptions and not be really clear with that. So I think it needs some skills that need to be built, but there are ways to do that, and I think it's exciting and it's deep and it needs commitment. It needs various fields of skills that add up to be able to address the complexity of what collective trauma is.
And there's no lack of collective trauma for us to work with in the world today, unfortunately. Well, I want to say a big thank you and deep gratitude for you, Anna, and for you, Thomas, for sharing and providing so much value today. I want to thank everybody who registered for this call. And if you are interested in looking at the course, you can go to collectivetraumaprinciples.com. We'll also send out some emails. That course is going to start mid-November, and you can get all the details there. I just want to, again, mention Thomas does have a book coming out next month called Healing Collective Trauma. You can actually go on Amazon right now or Barnes & Noble and pre-order that. So it's a wonderful book. I've read it, and it's just rich and packed with so much great information. You're going to want to grab that. So thanks again for everybody attending. We look forward to training and seeing you in the future. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Thomas, so much for being here.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.